So yeah, we're ready to go with Sprinkler Talk episode 40. So this is looking at approval bodies and schemes. And as I mentioned in last week's episode, I said that when I was preparing this presentation, that I would have a think about whether it would be best to fit into more than one part. And the answer to that is yes. So this is going to be part one. Part two will be in a few weeks' time after the kind of current schedule is finished. I can then do a part two. So in today's presentation, we're going to be looking at some of the key topics, kind of what is a code standard, what is an approval body, and then we'll start to look at one of the examples of approval bodies and schemes, and then I think in part two we'll start to look at some of the other options that are available both in the UK and worldwide. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, we're starting off with this, what is a code standard? And so I know we're kind of going back to basics, but I think that it's important to understand these key terms that when we start talking about things like compliance later on, we can kind of ground that in these other sort of key terms. So a code standard to start with. This is my definition here on the screen. A written code standard gives instruction, guidance and requirements on how to achieve a specific objective or maybe set of objectives. So standards can be very detailed on one particular topic. For example, we have BS 12259 Part 4, which is all about water motor alarm gongs. So we've got a whole standard devoted to quite a small piece of equipment for sprinkler systems, which, as we've mentioned before on this channel, doesn't have a massive amount of use these days. So that's an example of kind of, say, one standard on a very specific niche topic. Or you could have a standard which gives a very broad overview of a larger topic. So an example of that would be 12845, which covers the whole of a sprinkler system, from sort of design to handover, documentation, maintenance, all the different kind of components. So that's a very broad standard, and obviously it is a fair few additional pages over the other one I mentioned. And code standards can refer to other code standards, and they often do. Again, in 12845, there's a big list of references where we are referencing other things. So, for example, within 12845, it will say that the water motor alarm gong must conform to 12259 Part 4. Code standards generally allow for some flexibility of options to achieve the various criteria. So, there will be some exceptions, but I would say generally code standards do not tell you exactly how to achieve the objective. They tell you what must be achieved, and they might give you some options as far as achieving that. But yeah, they don't specify particular products or methodology in general. They certainly don't refer to specific manufacturers, because that wouldn't be fair. Code standards are trying to be quite independent and sort of overlooking rather than picking out a particular product or company to achieve the objective. Code standards can be regional, national or international. So yeah, 12845 is an ENBS, so it's a European and British standard. You could have a standard which is international, and there is an international sprinkler code, which does exist, and so we don't use it much in the UK. Or it just could be a national code, or even a code that's a bit more specific even still. So in America, they would have fire codes for individual states. I'm not sure that every state has got one, but certainly things like California and New York, for example, would have its own sort of code standards and methodologies for doing things. Now, these are obviously going to be very similar to national standards, etc. But I guess there must be some differences. Otherwise, why would they bother to do them? You can have multiple code standards that overlap on a particular topic. An example in the UK at the moment is we have the two standards for domestic and residential sprinklers. We have the EN standard 16925 and the current British standard 9251. So at the moment, we've got this kind of overlap of these two standards. But again, as I mentioned before, the 9251 is being rewritten, which will become a more specialised standard, I believe. Okay, what about following a code standard? Code standards are full of disclaimers in the foreword. We don't tend to see actual named authors of the standard. Clearly, the code standards are written by industry experts, people with a lot of experience. It's kind of a committee thing. So it is quite a slow process for code standards to be written. Especially if the code standard is, say, covering more than one country. Representatives from all those different countries will sit round a big table and sort of discuss what should go in, what shouldn't. There's various revisions. People get to make sort of objections or corrections to various things. And eventually you will get a full code standard written. In some circumstances, you would need to follow a code standard. For example, in the building codes, approved document B in the UK, where the building, as we talked about recently, the limit for residential buildings is now 11 metres. It specifically says that it should be a sprinkler system conforming to BS 9251 within that. So I guess in that instance, you will have to follow the standard. But in some cases, you wouldn't actually need to follow the standard necessarily, but that is obviously a very safe way to do it, as far as sort of not falling foul of kind of legal matters. If you've got a panel of experts which have kind of sat round the table and said, this is the best way to design, install, maintain a sprinkler system for it to work properly. If you want to then deviate from that standard and do something different, then you've got to have a pretty good reason for doing that. To kind of go against what the experts say. And therefore, they're often used in tender documents. And there's an example there at the bottom of the screen where a main contractor or customer may put together a tender document, or consultant put together a tender document, and it would say something quite simple like this: design, installation and handover of a full automatic fire sprinkler system in compliance to BSEN 12845 of 2015, with connections made available for appropriate monitoring and signalling. So they will kind of sum up what needs to happen in just one sentence, and then that will go out to tender, and say you will then get a bit more detail in terms of maybe the mechanical, electrical contractor would add some more detail in terms of what exactly is required, and say it'll kind of filter down through the ranks. But specifying it from that point of view just means that you don't have to specify what kind of alarm valve you need, what kind of backup systems you need, because it's all there in the standard anyway. So if you're not following the code standard, then you might be considering an engineered solution, which is something that has been designed to meet a particular problem. So I should have said a bit more on that actually. Why not following the standard? And that might be because there's a specific reason. It might just be that the application that you are using isn't covered by the code standards. You've got a particularly unusual building or particularly unusual application, or some limitations. So, for example, space could be a specific limitation, which just means that achieving what the code standards are saying becomes difficult or impossible. in which case you could consider an engineered solution, a solution that's designed to fix that problem. And there's more on engineered solutions in Sprinkler Talk number 35. Okay, moving on. What is an approval body? So the approval body is an organisation. So it's usually private companies these days. So some years ago, it would have been some kind of government arm, I guess, which would provide these approvals. But now it tends to be private companies which are doing this kind of service. It's set up to determine and test that a design, product or service is in compliance to a code standard or to some other base reference document. So again, everyone sort of good. I just noticed a comment there about seeing my screen, but I can see that sorted. Good. The approval bodies, they don't kind of go out on a limb, I suppose. That they're quite careful to cover themselves as well. So they will say, we have tested this product against this criteria, and we have found that it to be either satisfactory, in which case, rubber stamp, you can kind of say that it's approved, or if it doesn't meet that criteria, then you go back to the customer and you say, sorry, it's failed on this particular test, and then they can work to make that better. Often approval bodies will issue their own documents and then test and approve products and companies against this criteria. So in the example of a sprinkler system, would you get an approval body kind of signing off a whole of a sprinkler system? Well, you could, but often it is their own documents that they're using rather than code standards as such. We'll come on to some examples in a bit. So what's the difference between compliance and approval? So this is a question which crops up quite a lot in Project Fire. So for me, compliance is really based on an opinion. Obviously, it can be checked, but it's mostly down to opinion. So a sprinkler installer will say that this design complies with BSEN 12845. Because they've designed it to be so, and it's designed on their knowledge and experience. So they've done a course which they've passed. They know what they're doing, and they know the distances between sprinkler heads. They know where the supports go. They know what's required, and therefore they can say that the design complies with BSEN 12845. And of course, it probably does. But obviously, if you've got a very large system, there are going to probably be a few mistakes in there somewhere, particularly when it comes to actually installing it. Installers are going to miss a pipe hanger here and there, which could actually make it non-compliant. And say those are often found with an inspection, kind of a snagging list, and kind of put them right. But I hope you get the idea that it's based on opinion, really. Experience will say, I think it's good. I think it complies. A product manufacturer, unless someone sort of proves otherwise, if you say it complies with it, then you're kind of asking for other people really to get involved and prove to you why it doesn't comply. A product manufacturer can say that the product is in compliance with 12845 because it achieves an objective within the standard, and importantly, without being in conflict with any other criteria. So we often get the question, is ZoneCheck compliant to BSEN 12845? And that's kind of got a quick answer and a longer answer. The quick answer is yes, but the longer answer is, 12845 is a massive document, and probably only 1% or less than 1% of that document is actually relevant to ZoneCheck, relevant to flow switches, testing of flow switches, etc. ZoneCheck is not in conflict with any of the criteria within 12845, and it achieves one of the objectives of 1205, which is the testing of flow switches under certain conditions, certain flow conditions, for example. So it does that. And say it's not in conflict with the other 99% of the standard, and therefore we say, well, yeah, it is compliant. But I say it's just a little bit more complicated, I think, than some people realise. Approval from a third party, so check the claims and give a written agreement that the claim is accurate against set criteria. So, say when I'm talking about compliance, like say it's kind of more of an opinion, more of a statement. Approval is a certificate. It's a checked, signed, dated, recorded kind of, yeah, we've tested it and checked it and it's good. Approval from a third party, say check claims, will give a written agreement. There you go. So I'll give an example here. Zone check is UL approved, for example, because they've taken samples of the product along with additional information on the components, manufacturing, finishing. They've evaluated them against their own criteria. Okay, so UL have kind of picked out, okay, we're going to test it for this, 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 and this. They've done that. We'll go through another example of that later on. So major approval bodies, as far as sprinklers are concerned. These aren't the only approval bodies, and say in part 2 I'll be talking about some others. But yeah, it's certainly, as far as Project Fire is concerned, these are the 4 main approval bodies that we're kind of looking for national and international approval, which is the LPCB, the Loss Prevention Certification Board, FM, Factory Mutual, UL, and VDS. Okay, so FM and UL are based in America, and they have, worldwide recognition for their standards. LPCB in the UK, and because we export a lot of our products into Germany, VDS is the German-based approval body. But VDS is also recognised in many other European countries. So, yeah, that one is also important to us. So let's talk a little bit about the Loss Prevention Certification Board, or the LPCB. So the LPCB is an arm of the BRE, and lots of acronyms in this presentation. The Building Research Establishment, so which has got quite a long history. Again, I won't go into the detail today. Even when I sort of researched onto it, I found it quite confusing with kind of privatisation, government funding, changing of names, companies kind of merging and then splitting back up again. But anyway, right now, the LPCB is an arm of the BRE, and it offers third-party certification for products and services. So they're not exclusive to fire and security, but this is certainly what they're most well known for. They're primarily based at the BRE site, which is near Watford, where they have access to large test houses for full-scale fire testing. And that's obviously important, particularly when they are approving sprinkler heads. They'd actually got this kind of big warehouses, and they can partition them off. They can put false ceilings in, and they conduct full proper fire tests where they actually set fire to things with a kind of a known fire load, and they will test the effectiveness of the sprinkler heads discharging water at different pressures. So yeah, they are set up to do that kind of full-scale testing. They run approvals for products, as well as a contractor scheme and certification for sprinkler systems as a whole, which is kind of through the contractors. So the LPCB wouldn't approve a sprinkler system as such. They would basically give authority to the contractor to certificate that. Product approvals. So any product which is approved by the LPCB can display the LPCB mark. That's often accompanied by the certificate code. So for zone check, for example, it's 060A, and that's the kind of code that we put underneath our logo. And the product is regularly checked and audited to make sure that it remains within the scope of the approval. Any changes may require additional testing. So yeah, over the years, we have changed our product a few times. So Zone Check, using Zone Check an example, why not? So Zone Check used to be 650 millimeters long, and then we changed it to 450 millimeters. And when we did that, we changed some of the valves, so we resubmitted it for approval because the product had changed. And then very recently in the UK, we've started to look at different pumps. So again, we've gone back to the LPCB to reapprove the product. The LPCB run the Redbook Live, and there's the website there, www.redbooklive.com. And there it has got a list of all the approved products and approved companies. And that's, I think, a really good idea to have that kind of live document that's available to check at any point. So it's free, obviously free to use, free access, very quick to just type in a product, type in a code, type in a company name, and it'll tell you the current approval status. Yeah, so with the LPCB, you do get a certificate. So if people want a certificate to kind of show that Zone Check is LPCB approved, we can send them a certificate. You can see this is our latest version, which is actually 2018. So with some approval bodies, you do get a certificate with a kind of an expiry date on it. So this is our latest certificate. So even though it's from 2018, that is still relevant. And say that the way that they kind of use that is because of the Redbook Live. So if you weren't sure that this certificate was still in date, well, you can go on the Redbook and you can check the listing. So when the LPCB tested our Zone Check, it was assessed under the following criteria. So examination against drawings. So obviously we would submit some drawings. They would check them against them. System overview. So I suppose they would look at what the product is trying to achieve and whether that is good, whether that is suitable, whether they can kind of see any problems with what we're trying to achieve. Documentation. So they'd look at things like the data sheet and the instruction booklet and make sure that they are correct and they are offering the right kind of information. Clogging test. So yeah, over the years, this has been the hardest one for us to pass, is the clogging test. So this is basically acknowledging the fact that the pump is going to be used in suboptimal conditions within a sprinkler system. So i.e. it's not fair to just test it with nice, clean, fresh water every time. There's going to be some debris within the pipe. It's going to get dirty water. There's going to be some build-up of silt, of sand, of mud, of corrosion within that pipe. So can our pump sort of cope with having that kind of say suboptimal water to use? And so they do this kind of clogging test where they put other deposits in the water and see what happens to the pump. Pump running test, so they run the pump for a long period of time. Obviously, Zone Check's only designed to operate for sort of 1 minute at a time, but they test the pump to kind of several hours of operation to kind of make sure that it's reliable. Same with the pressure test. So yeah, the actual working pressure of a Zone Check is 12 bar. We test it to higher than that, and the LPCB test it to even higher still. So again, if it doesn't break at 25 bar, it's definitely going to be good at 12 bar. They do a system cycling test, which is where they're basically turning the pump on and off, on and off, on and off. Again, they're kind of simulating a whole life cycle. And again, checking the product is robust. The IP rating, I think we all know what that is. And then the marking. So there's various information we need to display on the product, such as the manufacturing name, the manufacturing product, the year of manufacture, the size, and yeah, obviously displaying the LPCB logo as well. So again, those are the criteria that it was assessed against, and then say you get a certificate and you get a listing on the Red Book page. And obviously that is a paid for service. We pay to have it approved, and then we pay to keep that approval active and pay for the audits, etc. Okay, moving on now to company approval. So the LPCB also approve sprinkler contractors, and that's under their scheme, which is called the LPS 1048 scheme. So yeah, LPS stands for Loss Prevention Scheme. It is actually called the 1148 scheme in other countries. So 1048 is what we use in UK and Ireland. 1148 is more of an international scheme. So essentially that there are 4 levels, and achieving those levels is based on how many employees you have, how many of those employees have done these various sprinkler exams, so how kind of qualified you are, and a kind of experience rating, so kind of what work you've done before and whether that's been successful, etc. So you can kind of work your way up these approval levels. So we've got levels 1 to 4, 4 being the top grade, and the higher level you are, the more variety of work can be completed with fewer inspections required. So, the majority of the sprinkler contractors that you've heard of are going to be level 4 because they want to have the highest accreditation. But just making you aware that there are different levels here. And there's a little table here which is showing you kind of what work can be completed. So, for example, the systems involving full hydraulically calculated systems can't be done by companies that are level 1 and 2. Level 3 can do it, but under supervision. So they'd basically have their work checked by the LPCB. And if you're level 4, then you can do that work without any supervision. When I say without any supervision, again, the contractor will be audited on an annual basis. So they will have to show examples of the designs that they've done. They will take them out onto site and show them around a completed sprinkler project. And again, that will be inspected by the LPCB, and any issues will be addressed. And yeah, depending on what they find, they'll either kind of give you a gold star, or they may ask for various changes to be made. And I guess under extreme cases, you would either drop down a level or have to be asked to leave the scheme, I guess, if things are really bad. So yeah, and then there's also what's called a 1048 COC, or Certificate of Conformity. And obviously, if you're under the 1148 scheme, it'll be 1148 COC. So this is a certificate which is issued by the sprinkler contractor. Again, if you're kind of under supervision, then I guess it would be sort of co-signed by the LPCB to say that it's good. On that certificate, there will be a list of minor and major non-conformances, although if you've got major non-conformances, then I guess that the certificate wouldn't be issued anyway. It would be more of an inspection certificate rather than a certificate of conformity. So yeah, a minor non-conformity means a departure from the installation standard that will not reduce the effectiveness of the sprinkler protection to control or extinguish a fire. So that is kind of, again, recognising that the standard is giving you, an ideal world. We don't live in an ideal world, and there may be instances where departing from the standard is just necessary to achieve the end result. And so that might just be that you can't place a head in a particular position because of other kind of structural works that are going on in the ceiling, other services there. So you've just had to move it, I don't know, 50 millimeters to the left. That'll be a minor non-conformance. A major non-conformance, a departure from the installation standard that would significantly reduce the effectiveness of the sprinkler protection to control or extinguish a fire. So a silly example of a major non-conformance is there's no there's no stored water. You know, you've got you've got a pump, you've got pipes, you've got heads, so you haven't got any stored water. That would be a major non-conformance, and obviously the certificate would not be issued under those circumstances. Okay, that's the end of that sprinkler talk. In part 2, I will be looking at examples. So we've gone over the LPCB, so I'll look into other approval bodies. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, FIRAS is one that I haven't mentioned in part 1. I'll definitely be mentioning FIRAS in part 2. Again, that is like an alternative to the LPCB in the UK. So you could have an LPCB approval, you can have FIRAS approval, the FIRAS have also got an inspection sort of arm as well. So yeah, we'll be going over the differences between LPCB and FIRAS in part 2. I'll say, as per usual, I'll just hang on and see if there's any other questions in the chat. Otherwise, I hope you have a good rest of the week, and I'll see you next week, where we're going to be looking at rules of obstructions, part 1. So that we're looking at placing sprinkler heads, what happens if you've got voids, ducts, cable trays, etc. How would you kind of manage that with your sprinkler design work?